Hi, everyone. Good evening. I could not be happier about tonight's broadcast. Today is Monday, March 30th, 2020. Tonight, it is my great honor and pleasure to welcome in my therapist and a fantastic mind in the field of psychology, JD Gill. So, welcome to the broadcast tonight, JD.
I'm going to quit if you keep talking like that.
um, I'm going to begin with a couple of questions that I get asked all the time. Probably the one that I get asked maybe as often as any questions is how do you find a good therapist? How do you find one? How do you recognize one when you find them, when you go to meet with a therapist? And what is it that you look for in a therapist that you would consider to be a good therapist?
Wow. I think primarily what I would look for is somebody who listens. There's something about a person having the capacity to be deeply reflective. And I think it's important that when you find somebody like that, it's amazing how well you feel heard. I mean, they just plain listen. And you can talk openly. I think the other thing I would look for, because most of the work that matters, I think, in psychology, you need to find somebody who has some psychodynamic training or some training in attachment theory, because those two approaches provide a richer framework for the construction of a personality. And of course, our personalities are built the way our houses are built, this board's on top of that board's on top of that board. So it has to be somebody who at least knows what that stuff is.
Mm.
And when they listen to you, can try to make some sense out of it. I think that's where I'd start.
Are there red flags that come up for you if somebody were meeting with a therapist for the first or second time? Are there things that would show up in the therapist's responses and their therapist participation that would be red flags for you that you might have somebody that doesn't have that capacity that you're describing?
It's a really good question. I think I would be turned off by somebody who is overly friendly. I mean, I wouldn't want the therapist to be mean, but I'd want them to be serious and to
Mm.
really listen. Um, and somebody that was too chatty about surface events would turn me off, I think. Another person that would turn me off is somebody that I felt was really rigid, because this is an enterprise that requires the therapist to hunt around and try to find where you are.
Right.
And that's not as easy as it sounds, because the therapist doesn't know you, doesn't know your background, doesn't know the context. So the therapist is kind of like going to a movie he or she has never seen before. And you're trying to rapidly get as much information as you can. It really requires a lot of listening.
Right. I'm wondering in the face of the COVID pandemic right now that we're all experiencing, that we're all sharing, one of the reasons why we opened this series up as we have is to provide people with another opportunity for connection during times when they might be feeling isolated. As you're working with clients, as you're working in the field and thinking in the way that you do, what about this pandemic? I guess I want to ask the question, what's unique about what we're going through and what's not unique about what we're going through? If there is answers, if there are answers to both of those questions, what's unique and what's not unique about the times that we're all experiencing right now?
I think it's pretty rare for us to be this frightened. In the life we blissfully enjoyed a month ago, we went about our business and did pretty much what we wanted. Now there's a serious threat. And depending on the bracket you're in, for a person like myself, the threat is not little. So I've been ordered by my doctors to stay inside. You know, it's kind of like I committed some terrible crime and this is my punishment.
Hmm.
But I think being cut off, being cooped up has two things. Either you're more isolated or you're less isolated. I was speaking with my son last night, who lives in Washington D.C., and he's at home with his family of three boys, and the oldest one's 9, so it's a complete madhouse. And he was talking about the fact that in many ways his life is harder now because he's home than it would be if he was at his law office, you know. So I think for others of us, it's a more of a time to be isolated, and time kind of slows down. And when that happens, you get access to memories, and you get access to events that you didn't realize were as formative as they are, or you see them in a new light. So it can be a fantastic period of opening. But at the same time, it can be an enormous period of stress because we like to keep all that stuff in the closet, you know? I mean, we don't want that out here where I can feel it and know it. It's better if it's in there where I don't know it's around. So I think just living with the fear, this is a brutal illness, and many of my friends who are doctors um, are having a hell of a time trying to keep people alive, and many of them they can't keep alive. So I don't think we've ever really faced anything quite like this.
Right, right. I want to ask one other question to give some people some background. I met you in 19, I think it was 1997 or 8, might have been 7. Um, I was working at a clinic for sex offenders, and you came in. You were brought in as to do supervision with the entire team, I believe, the entire clinical team, and that's where I first encountered you. And I wrote about this in my new book that you started asking us how we felt about the clients, and it was terrifying. It was terrifying because we were really comfortable talking about sex offenders. We were really comfortable talking about the people that we saw is down there. That made us feel really comfortable to keep a safe distance between us and the who we thought were the mentally ill ones there. And you had the audacity to ask us questions about our frustration, our fear, our anxiety, even our disdain at times. And it was you were gentle about it, but it was a frightening thing for me. And I knew something was different about you back then. And then a year or two later, my wife started going to therapy, and then I started going to therapy with you. So that's our background. And since then, you've written, how many books did you say at the outset of this? And you're working on
14.
14 books. And if people want to read your books, what's the best way to find them?
Best way is to go to Amazon and in the search window, type JD space GILL and tap the search magnifying glass, and they will come up. I also have an author's page on Amazon, and you can click on that, and they will show what's available.
Yeah. If you go to my new book and you see it shows JD as being the author of the forward of my new book, and you can click on her
Yeah,
name there. It's hyperlinked there, and that'll
yeah,
take you right to all of her books and all of her pages. I just remember that.
yeah.
One other question before I turn it over to the audience to ask some questions. You know, obviously I run a wilderness therapy program as well as an intensive program, and so much of our work is looking at the early contexts of your family of origin, looking at mother and father. And that can be for some parents a very guilt producing endeavor to kind of trace things back to their parents. And if you're the parent of a child that comes to our program, that can be very triggering for you. So the finger is being pointed right at you in this process. So, what would you say to the mothers and fathers who feel that, respond to that way, who think that maybe our emphasis in looking back at the early context and the family of origin and the wounding that may have happened there as some kind of wound that might be showing up in the symptoms we see today? What would you say to provide them with some comfort or some insight into that process if it's an overwhelming or triggering feeling for them.
I think it is triggering and overwhelming. I think it's very hard to be a parent. It's very hard to have parents. I mean, it's a lousy deal, you know. And part of the problem is that none of us had perfect parents, and none of us are perfect parents. You know, I mean, there's no way. We had what we had. We didn't get to have every background. We just had the one we had. And for those of us who are lucky, we went and started to do some work about that to try and figure out how we got so screwed up and how we can get so unscrewed up, you know? So I can't tell you how much I admire people who go into therapy, because people who go into therapy are always the healthiest people in the whole community. Everybody else wants to, but they're too afraid, you know? And it's easy to see why. Their parents were monsters. So they automatically assume that the therapist is going to be a monster. And since their parents told them everything they were supposed to do, they think that's what the therapist is going to do. But it isn't like that. You know, we go to dentists, we go to doctors, we get our eyes checked. I mean, we do all this stuff. We get our automobiles treated with kid gloves. But it never occurs to us to go to a therapist. Why? Because it wasn't something you did where we came from. Our parents didn't go to therapists, and anybody who went to a therapist was a nutcase, you know. But it's far from the case. The best people are the ones who go to therapists. And they're the lucky ones because they get to spend so much time understanding who they are, so their life finally begins to make some kind of sense, you know? I once saw a cartoon in the New Yorker where some guy was gowned and he was on an examining table in a physical medicine office. And the doctor had his clipboard, and the caption was, "Any evidence of physical activity in your family?" But you know, when the therapist says, "Is there any evidence of something in your family?" we think, "Oh my God, that's a terrible thing." Well, it's not a terrible thing. I mean, it's how we get where we are. And so if I had the worst childhood in the state, okay, I had the worst childhood in the state. Now, what the hell am I going to do about it? You know, I've got to figure out how to manage that thing that I am, you know. So I would urge parents to not be too sensitive about not getting everything perfect. Nothing's perfect, and perfect is the wrong goal anyway. The right goal is entirety, completeness. That's the goal, not perfect. You know, right. Those are my bigoted ideas.
You know, I tell the story about my mother all the time, who happens to be on the broadcast tonight. My mother, years ago, when I set a boundary with her, told her what I needed, and we were having a little bit of a disagreement about her parenting. Twice now, after those kinds of discussions, her response, which I find to be absolutely remarkable, and I tell everybody this, and my mom's never heard me say this in public before, but she did something crazy. She went to therapy. And she said to me, in both instances, "I'm going to go to therapy and see if I can figure out if I'm able to give you what you're asking for." And wow. And just that idea, like that gift, you know, the first thing she did was do that when I was a teenager, but now doing it, you know, many years later is really, really admirable. And I feel lucky to have a mom that would be willing to go to therapy, to look at herself and to look at the ways that she may or may not be able to give me what I'm asking for. So somebody writes this in here. Somebody says, with so many things being limited now, including the outdoor activities, what activities do you recommend during this time when everything is so limited? The isolation seems so suffocating. How do you become or feel liberated during these times?
That's a hard question to answer because it depends on who you are. Um, if everything you love is outdoors, yeah, it's going to be a tough time. But there might be things you can do indoors. I mean, and you certainly are, at least in this community, it's okay to go on a walk as long as you don't get any close to anybody. So I would urge you to do that. If you get a chance to go on a walk, go on one. But my refuge has always been reading, because reading kind of always has taken me somewhere else. And I can sit down with a good book. I did this morning, and 4 hours went by. I was absolutely astounded that that much time had gone by. So, I mean, I highly recommend if you can find something that's really good to read. It doesn't have to be something all the critics think is wonderful. I mean, if you like to read good housekeeping magazines, I mean, read that. I mean, read anything, just read, and that will take you away. I think it also might help if you, in the evening, can have an hour or two this television time. I'm not a TV watcher, but during this time, it really works. You can watch, absolute garbage and get caught up in it, and 2 hours goes by. So short
Yeah.
of that, I'm not sure. I think it matters. You should think about what really you really like and try to figure out some activity in relation to that. That's a pretty lousy suggestion, but it's
I
a
think it
start.
goes in line with something I've been thinking about a lot during these times, which is to make sure to practice a lot of self-kindness because I think for a lot of us, we judge what we do or don't do. And like the TV thing you said, you're not a TV person, but you're giving yourself permission to watch garbage and escape for a couple of hours. Um, I think that that's another thing is that so many of us have such a difficult time when we're not doing something purposeful, right? Productive.
You know, I once said to my analyst, I'm worried about myself because I'm relaxing way more than I'm used to relaxing. Of course, he thought this was progress, it shows how jaded he was. But I said, I'm really worried about this. And he leaned back in his chair and he said, yes, there are times I stare at the wall, and there are times I stare at the wall and drool. Uh, yeah, it's
You've told
okay.
me many times. You've told me
Okay.
many times to go and stare at the wall, and if I can get really good at it, drool. So now I know where that comes from.
Yeah. Yeah,
Another,
it's a good idea to give yourself some latitude, because if you're isolated, your activity level is bound to go down. There's no way you can help it.
right,
And I would allow that to happen. I mean, a lot of pieces can get picked up if we ever get through this.
right. Someone writes in, there is so main concern uh, is my father may lose the caregiver who takes care of my mother half of the week. She is advanced stages of an illness. We live on opposite coasts, and although I arrange for everything they need in terms of food, deliveries, etc., in this quarantine, I cannot, however, replace a caregiver. My flying across the country may put my parents at more risk because of my mother's compromised immune system and the germs I would pick up along the way. My father is in no physical shape to take care of her alone. I know I need to let go. I have no idea. I have no control over any of this, but I am struggling.
Well, I'm so sorry about your mother. Um, there, some of the things you may already have done that I would think of doing is if your mother's in a big city, I would get in touch with public health people, and find out what options are available to people like your mother, because all those things have been discussed and thought through in committee meetings. If it's near a university, I would contact the university. the nursing department or the Department of Medicine or whatever is close to what her ailment is, and ask them for advice and see what they have to say, because these people often know channels and they know contacts that the rest of us don't know. If you can't do anything, then you have to begin to try and come to grips with the fact that you can't do anything. And that's a terrifying thing, because all of us have this feeling that we can do something, and we love to. That's why we're such bad patients. We get in the hospital and we won't, we just won't be patients. We need to be in charge of everything. It's crazy. So the medical people sedate us just to get us quiet. So I think that it's understandable, because it's a giant fear that you can't do something, but there are things you can't do. And I would also try to read about that. I would also try to find somebody in the therapeutic community to talk to, because that would really help you, I think, not be so harsh on yourself if you have that, if you get to the point of doing that.
Right. And that other thing that having somebody is, you're not alone,
Right.
right? Even if it's for an hour a week, not being alone for an hour a week is very, very important for us,
The big
right?
hour. Yes, huge hour.
Another question comes in. Do you believe that this could be a wonderful thing on the other side of fear? I feel so light, focused, creative more than ever. I like being alone, and I'm trying to be respectful and authentic at the same time.
Well, you're very lucky. You obviously have the equipment to maximize being alone. That's a tremendous asset to have. And I would say go for it. Do whatever you need to do. It may be a while, but we're in this. So maybe you could start a project you've always wanted to do, and this might be a great time to do it. But I think it's wonderful that you have the ability to entertain yourself by yourself. That's a tremendous asset.
I love the idea. I mean, I'm so curious about the other side of this. I'm so curious about what that's going to feel like and be like. And, when I've told the story many times to our clients that when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, I had about 2 weeks of depression,
Well,
like
that,
where I felt really sad and a lot of grief. And
well,
somewhere
that's
around the end of the 2 week mark, it turned to gratitude. I didn't try to be grateful. I just realized that there's a shelf life on this thing.
right.
And, I'm going to, it's not going to get better. We're not getting better. Right. And
Yeah,
so I started to be grateful for my symptom is a lack of feeling on my hands and feet mostly. And so I started to be grateful for the feeling that I still had left. It was just
yeah.
feeling and leaning into the grief. And then because I allowed myself to go through that, then I was able to find the gratitude for what I still had. And so I really look forward to the other side of this experience for all of us.
Those are lovely words.
Somebody says our oldest son started Evoke 2 weeks ago, and now we are at home with our two younger children. For us, life completely changed since 2 weeks ago.
I would
I
imagine. It might be a wonderful time to try to shore up the foundations in your family. I mean, while your other son or daughter is away. Was it a son or was it a
son,
daughter?
yeah,
The
son.
son. Well, your son's away. Your son's going to come back in many ways a different kind of person. And it's going to be an exciting time for all of you to try and figure out how to be new. So I'm glad you're getting a head start on it. And I would really urge you to embrace the challenge of it being new. I mean, how often do we get to be new? I mean, that's pretty exciting. I mean, you might not think it's so exciting, but in a way, it can be an opportunity if you see it in that light.
I've had parents tell me this, so I can say it because it's been told to me that this is the most wonderful gift in the very worst wrapping paper ever. Um, and I
Yeah,
think I really do think that I would also say to this parent, thank you for coming on tonight and sharing that with us, for you
yeah,
not being alone. And I'm sure there are dozens of parents that are listening tonight who have been where you've been,
yeah,
and they might even make some comments that Lindsay could share with us. That would be helpful. Somebody wrote to your point about slowing down and gaining access to inside thoughts. I have been having very vivid dreams these days. It
yay!
feels like a new journey.
Oh, that's wonderful. I would urge you to write them down. When you wake up, just sketch down what it's about. And then after you stumble around and find your shoes, you can fill it out a little more. But the dreams are the fact that you're having more dreams is really fabulous because what that means is that your mind is opening. You know, our minds won't open if we're frightened. This is what so many therapists don't understand. You know, the elements necessary for secure attachment. There are two. There are two things. The child has to feel safe and welcome. If the child doesn't feel safe and welcome, the autonomic nervous system is not going to quiet down, and the infant's not going to be able to learn anything. So parents who scream at their kids because the kids aren't listening are pouring the wrong thing on the fire, you know? So the fact that you're dreaming more means you feel safe in some way. It's entirely possible that the increased distance has increased a sense of safety for you. I
Mm.
would take advantage of it and write all this stuff down and take it to your therapist. And hopefully, your therapist knows enough about how personalities are built that this can create questions to open new channels. I hope it does.
Jamie, I don't know if this is too generic of a question to ask you.
I only answer questions that are not generic.
Okay. What in general are our dreams trying to do for us? What are they trying? What's the purpose of them, if you will, in the human psyche? Why are our dreams appearing to us?
Well, you're going to get as many answers to that question as people you ask. But I think fundamentally, the dreams occur in a different language than the language you use in the day. The dreams occur in a metaphor language. And so the dreams take elements out of the day and they take elements out of things we're concerned or worried about and scramble them all up and make a story about it. And they do this so that we won't get too much access to our unconscious operation, because that would scare the hell out of us. So we can only get access to these parts of our mind when we're ready to access them. We have to be strong enough to do it. But it sounds like what you're doing is you're certainly strong enough to get the messages. And you might be able to find some themes in them. That's another thing. And if you're having trouble doing it, one thing you might imagine is that all the characters in the dreams are components of you. And just think about it from that perspective.
Someone says instruments can be very liberating. Also, reading has been helping me. Thank you for sharing that. What advice do you have for people feeling bogged down or overwhelmed by digging into their past doing therapy, especially when feelings of shame arise, sometimes without reference to specific events? So they're asking if going back and doing your therapy, going back into your past digging into it doesn't cause you any kind of relief, but actually causes a bogged down or overwhelming feeling, what would you, excuse me, what would you say to that person?
You know, the great therapist Thomas Ogden said that if everything's going well in an analysis, along about the fourth year, the patient will say, I'm worse off now than I was when I started this. And Ogden said, I always feel like saying to them, you're worse off now than you thought you were when you started this. I think it's if you're feeling too overwhelmed, your therapist needs to know about that. The business of accessing what's unknown, which is what we're doing, we're accessing what Christopher Bolas, a British analyst, called it a wonderful phrase. He called it the unthought known. I kind of know it, but I've never thought it. I mean, it's kind of in that twilight zone. So if it's coming too fast and it's too furious and you can't deal with it, that's not optimal. I would say to your therapist, wait a minute, I'm having a hell of a time with this, you know? And the therapist then can figure out how to back off and add some support to the equation. It's not necessary that you be Superman. You don't have to take it, you know? I mean, it needs to come optimally. Besides, if it's too much and you're overwhelmed, it's going to key your autonomic nervous system and you aren't going to learn anything. Right. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Someone writes, I have just finished reading The Drama of the Gifted Child. Made so much sense to me as a mother. Are there other books that discuss in depth the role of fathers?
Yes. The world of fathers is a bit different from the world of mothers because the baby and the mother are the same thing. And the father is other. So the father is the child's first experience of other. And it's very critical because just as I need my mother to be able to find me and resonate with me, I also need my father to be able to find me as an other. Because if my father can't do that, I'm going to have trouble with others later on in my life, right? Mm-hmm. So there's an old story, you know, where the mother says to the child, I will always be here for you. I will never leave you. And the father takes the child up on the mountainside and says, look at that. So in a way, the mother is more the vehicle. This is a bit sexist, but the mother's a much more a vehicle of identity and foundation, whereas the father is the introduction to what's other or the outside world. If that makes any sense. There's a lot written about this.
I was wondering if you've written about any of the fathers in your writing.
I think that I wrote about it when I wrote about the sort of ancient myths of femininity and the ancient myths of masculinity in a book called Finding Human. And the myth for the mother is the story of Aphrodite and Psyche. And the myth for the masculine is the legend of the Holy Grail. They're interestingly different. But in a way, they both require a coming to a greater awareness. You could Google up psychoanalysis of fatherhood, And I'll bet you get 2,000 hits.
Jamie, I was also thinking the drama of the gifted child
Yeah,
for me, and the misery of the good child, which you wrote, which reminds me a lot of the drama of the gifted child. Um, while it might focus on the mother, I also see my role with the child in that role. I mean, the fact that in 1979 she was talking about mothers, um, that has blended a little bit, and the masculine and feminine have shifted between the
absolutely.
genders a little bit. So there's still value in that there. I think of it in that way. Raising Cain is a book that we talk about and read about, just sons specifically. And this, it's basically, they don't say it this way, but it's basically this idea of toxic masculinity that
Yeah,
we perpetuate in our male role model. So that might also be a reference point to talk
yeah,
about the masculine journey. You also talk about in at the end of the letters of Juliet, you compare the masculine and the feminine journey.
right, right.
Kind of talk about it there too.
Yeah.
Someone says, "Thank you for speaking tonight, Dr. Gill. I am struggling with finding routine. I'm working from home and I can't separate the work with my new quarantine life. I miss the office so much."
I'll bet you do. I think we all miss the office. I mean, I used to hate to drive to the university in the morning because of the traffic, but I'd kill to do it now. Good luck. Good luck.
Right. I want to go grocery shopping. I have
Yeah,
an immunosuppressant drug that I take for my MS, and so I'm extra careful. And I would just love to go to the grocery
yeah.
stores.
Wouldn't that be fun?
Yeah. Someone says, in regards to the earlier commentary, so resonant. I beat myself up all the time about not being productive. Someone writes in, thank you for that, by the way. I'm anticipating my son returning from Evoke mid to late April. He's been doing well in a highly structured program. I'm a healthcare worker in a hospital hard hit by COVID-19, so
Oh,
can't be home with him all day. I'm a single mom. What ideas do you have about transitioning to home in this strange time? Idle time seems like a dangerous proposition for him.
wow. That's tough. I would, is your son generally concerned about your feelings or your road a hole in life? I wonder if he is, tell him, this is a disaster. We don't have enough equipment. We don't have enough people. I mean, this is a nightmare. And the sky is falling. Chicken Little was right. And I am so tired and I am so overloaded that I can't. I probably should write a note to myself to remind myself to brush my teeth, you know? And I'm sorry, but I can't bring you a hell of a lot right now. If you can't talk to him and he can't talk to you, I think I would write it down and give it to him. You have to understand the work I do. I don't have two lives every day. I only have one life, and it's used to the max. You
I
might
was
also want
thinking,
to contact his therapist at Evoke and try to get some pointers from that person.
well, I was thinking to myself that, especially this, am I assuming it's a mom? No, she says I'm a single mom. Um, Back to your comment, a suggestion to somebody earlier that they get a therapist, somebody they can talk to.
She
Um,
doesn't have any time to get a therapist. I
yeah,
mean, I
yeah,
wish she did.
yeah,
It-
yeah. You might have to listen to something on the way to work
yeah,
where you don't feel alone with somebody
yeah.
talking. Somebody says, I love to read and can happily entertain myself. My worry is my children. The youngest is 16, and the pressure I feel to keep them happy and entertained, which also means not having them on their technology excessively. Also, my son, who was at Evoke and currently at Aftercare, is home because his program had to pause. And although he is happy to be home, I worry that it won't be good for him. I worry about keeping structure in place for him without micromanaging.
Well, that's a great question. Um, you're, I almost feel like giving a similar answer. I mean, it's not an ordinary time. Uh, you know, my students in Oregon told me that if the barn catches on fire and you get the horses out, you want to tie them up because if you don't, they'll run right back in the barn and burn up. Now, why will they do that? Well, they've learned that the barn is the safe place. It's not safe today, but they don't know that. Okay? But we're the same. Your kids come to you for a sense of safety. And you're trying to meet this need. And you're struggling to do that. I think I would let them know this is not an ordinary time. And in an ordinary time, we might be able to function in an ordinary way, but it's okay if we're not quite ordinary right now. It really is okay.
Right. Thank you, Jamie. Somebody says, some people say that therapy is just navel gazing, my husband. And how will it help him or our marriage?
uh, Finally, a perceptive husband. But that's a defense, to be blunt about it. I mean, your husband doesn't want anything to do with it, you know, because I've not met your husband, and I'm the wrongest about people I haven't met. But it sounds to me at my ear that he's a little worried about psychotherapy. And I'm not sure I want someone digging around in my backyard, you know. So I think that therapy can be navel gazing, you know, if you have the wrong therapist. But if you have a really good therapist, I think the therapist is not going to navel gaze with you so much as to really listen carefully and try to understand where you're coming from, what it feels like to be you, not what it feels like to be the therapist, you know. And let me say this plain and simple, if Brad hasn't already said it 1,000 times. If your therapist has the right answer for you, get another therapist. Therapists don't have the right answer for you. They need to help you find the right answer for you. And the psychotherapy, if it's going to be effective, is going to change the therapist as much as it's going to change you. So this is a serious business. And the therapist is getting into this knowing that it's going to change a lot of things. So I don't think it's quite as frivolous as navel gazing, but I don't blame your husband at all for being worried about it. And, you know, I think that worry on his part is worth respect, frankly.
You know, I've told you this, Jamie, many times. I wrote about this in the new book. It took me a while to figure out what was going on in therapy. I didn't have any other options, so I wasn't inclined to quit. Although I had that thought many times because I think it was because I went into therapy with the unconscious belief that somehow you were going to give me some tricks to hack life so that it would be exactly how I wanted it to be. Um, and it was a while before I figured out that the change was going to happen inside of me and that was going to come out of, for the first time in my life, being in a context where I was nearly completely, if not completely, welcomed and honored for who I was and what I felt and what I thought. And then that had to change. And that's a subtle,
Mm-hmm.
long process. That's not an epiphany or a couple of steps here or there. You know, it took me a long time. You and I shared the example of how when we both came to this moment where we realized that the therapist could tolerate us, that became the moment where things started to shift pretty dramatically at a really basic level.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah. My partner has been sober for 2 years. We went to his brother's wedding 2 months ago and discussed in length if he felt comfortable drinking for the first for the best man speech and to celebrate his brother's wedding. I wish I could take that decision back. He had a handle on the drinking and it really was a casual thing between him and friends. Now with the quarantine, he is spiraling. He drinks alone and he has hidden it from me multiple times. We talk and agree it's not okay, but he is not stopping. I'm trying to take care of myself during these difficult times, and I don't know how to handle my relationship with him or support him right now.
Wow. I'm very sorry to hear that. That's really a terrible story. Um, you know, I know you know this. I'm not trying to talk down to you, but you can't you can't fix him. Uh, he's obviously under tremendous pain. Um, if there's any, if you have any ability to talk to people at a psychiatric hospital, I would urge you to do so. You're always welcome to talk to them. Just call them up and say, I want to talk to the crisis worker. And our crisis worker's on call 24/7, and they will talk to you. And if you tell them this story, say, I'm terribly worried about this guy. He's heading for no man's land, and I'm unable to manage it. Do you have any advice? And see what these people have to say. Once again, they usually have contacts that the rest of us don't have. They may have a person in mind. They may have a program. They may have something. And even in this time of isolation, it's an essential thing to go to a hospital. You can do that.
I was thinking also you could go to a virtual Al-Anon or Codependence Anonymous meeting. They're having those now. So go to coda.org or alanon.org or familiesanonymous.org. And not only can you attend a virtual meeting where you can share your story and listen to other people's stories about how they've coped with very, very similar circumstances, but everybody there will be absolutely open to the idea of contacting you one-on-one afterwards and just offering you kind of this mentoring role about how to
Right.
navigate loving somebody who's in a destructive spiral of drinking. So I think that that's another thing that you could find a contact with.
You could also try to contact any of the AA sponsors and tell them the story because I mean I'm sure there's somebody who would be willing to talk to your husband or to
Right.
you or to both of you.
Looks like we're going to run out of time. We have about 9 minutes left, but I'm gonna try to read through some of these. Some of them we might not respond to, Jamie. They might just be comments. We love to go out and about this quarantine. We love to go out and about, and this quarantine sucks, to be honest. My daughter is busy, and we need to get out of the house at least once a day. Usually we go on walks, but we feel limited with our options. It's hard to stay positive.
I hear you. It's miserable to be stuck in the house. I feel like a prisoner. I'm hiding behind the plant, looking out the window to see if there are any germs circulating around out there. I'm sick of it.
Hmm.
But it's what we're stuck with. It's not an ordinary time. The world has never seen anything like this. This is not ordinary. You know, we can't be ordinary now.
And in a way, that's why I started doing these, is so we could connect a little bit. Um, Connection with our similar kinds of pain and stress can offer some relief. And so, thank you for joining us and sharing. And you're not alone.
Absolutely.
I agree about the feeling of not being able to do anything. I try not to react too much to my daughter's moods or feelings because I know they will pass. She has at times been very distressed about the current situation, but she has also shown me her resilience. She is a recovering addict, and I have been hearing of relapses during this time. A friend's son who is in recovery OD'd last week.
Oh no.
That is my fear, of course, but I treasure every moment and try to just be a container, not react, but support and love her.
That sounds wonderful.
Doesn't it?
Yes.
You know,
She's
my daughter said to me last night, she said, "Dad, it's not anything that you're doing that's bugging me, it's your beingness that's bothering me."
yeah. Well, I
And
get
I
the
totally understood exactly what she was talking about.
yeah, exactly.
All right, Jamie. Someone says, can you describe the optimal process in therapy? Um,
The
so,
optimal process in therapy is when I describe to my therapist my dilemma. I'm how I'm feeling and what I'm concerned about. And if my therapist knows what he or she is doing, they can hear this and try to account for it in terms of developmental structure. And then start asking me about elements in my experience, in my background, and start to discover where I get this from. You know, um, my mother was a college professor, and quite frankly, she was never satisfied with anything I did. I mean, it would be nice if I'd win the Nobel Prize or something like that, but what you're doing now, so it's not hard to imagine that I never feel like I'm finished. I'm not done yet. Well, I know where that came from, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's wired in. But now I know how to manage it a little better. I know that there's that thought that my mother gave to me, bless her heart, and I have to deal with it for the rest of my days. So, okay, if I have a dent in my fender, okay, how do I deal with it? Right? So, what in a good therapy situation happens is my life story starts to be opened out. And the therapist and I are walking through it, trying to notice things and trying to put it together so that we can somehow account for what I'm doing now or how I'm feeling now. So it makes sense. Do you understand? Then once I can kind of understand it and I can see what it is, I can begin for the first time to understand what kind of a person I am. I never have been able to know what that person's like before, and now I'm beginning to see it. It's a huge difference. It's as big a difference as people who go to college versus people who don't go to college. You know, that college education does something. I don't know what it does, but it does something, and it enables you to see the world from a different angle. And I think psychotherapy does the same thing. You suddenly realize I'm not seeing things the same way I used to. It's not that the world has changed, but I'm not seeing them the same. It's different now. I hope that's helpful a little.
thank you. Someone says, please know that your son is being extremely well cared for at Evoke. The professionals and staff are wonderful. Focus on doing your work that the therapist assigns you. Learn everything you can through this process. This is a learning and growing process for him as well as the parents. Trust the process. Excuse me. Someone says, Jamie, do you recommend Iron John by Robert Bly for addressing this? I read it last year and found it very helpful.
Iron John's a very interesting story, especially the business about the lake and the maiden and all of this kind of thing. I think there is no question that if you're a male, you can't help but know that you have a certain amount of capacity. That's what males have. They're capable. But the big question is, what are you going to use that for? Are you going to use it in the service of life, or are you going to use it in the service of destruction? And really, that's what Iron John is about, is him coming to solve that equation. So I'm delighted you're reading that.
Jamie, I'm gonna just we won't get to all of these. We've received many comments and questions, and we can't really get to all of them, and I'm sorry, but I'm gonna read one last one, and then I'm gonna just ask you a couple of questions before we wrap up. Someone says, "Very good to hear, Jamie. I really admire you both. Both very inspiring and filled with wonderful insights." Um,
Thank you.
so again, if you want to learn more about Jamie's work, go to her Amazon page. J.D. Gill is her author name. And you can find all of her books there. You're writing a couple of new books. What are you writing about right now?
Well, only one of them is about psychology.
Hmm.
And I'll let you know the title. The title is Toxic America. So
Great.
it's topical.
Um, what's the last favorite book and last favorite movie that you've seen, like in the past 6 months or so, or even more recently? What's your last favorite book or last favorite movie?
Well, the last favorite movie I saw is The Portrait of a Lady on Fire. I saw it at the Sedona Film Festival, and I could not speak after it was over. It's so fabulous. I think the book that I have enjoyed reading in the past 6 months is the psychotherapy of Pichon Riviera, who is an Argentinian analyst who basically discovered everything the object relations people were discovering, but he did it all by himself, stuck off there in Argentina. And it's absolutely exciting to read him come to these ideas all on his own.
Thank you, Jamie. One last comment. I'm reading your book, The Audacity to Be You. Good stuff. The chapter on marriage has been really helpful and all makes so much sense. I love it. Thank you, JD Gill, for your contributions. Thanks. And again,
Oh,
I'm sorry that we couldn't get to all of your comments and questions. I really appreciate your participation and asking questions. And Jamie, thank you for everything you've given to me, my family, our lives, and thank you for joining us this evening to share with us. I'm so glad to be able to get to share with all of these people you.
it's been a pleasure.
All right. All right, folks. The next broadcast will be tomorrow evening at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. And tomorrow, my guest will be Rick Heiser. He's my partner and our executive director, and he's going to address all things COVID related to Evoke therapy programs. So if you have some questions about that, feel free to join us. And for the rest of you, all of these broadcasts, including this one, are available on the podcast app, on your favorite podcast app, on an iPhone. Just use the podcast app. On an Android, you can use SoundCloud, the SoundCloud app, or go to soundcloud.com. And all of these get turned into a podcast the next day so you can listen to them on the go. So thank you for joining us this evening. I'll see you tomorrow night. Take care. Bye-bye.